Hello. So welcome, Charles Darwin House. Welcome to Charles Darwin House in London. We are shortly going to be live from the Science is Vital AGM. So if you're watching on the stream, you'll be able to see everything that happens, and hopefully you'll be able to join in with chatting as well. So stay tuned. It's due to start at 6:30. Hopefully we'll be closer on time. Yeah. Just testing the audio. Still looking quiet. Hold on. So just testing the audio again. Still looking quite quiet. How did you switch?
On the bottom there's a red button.
About this one?
Yeah.
Hello.
Oh. Okay. Do you have a computer in this room? Yes.
So just testing the audio again. Hopefully that's a good deal louder. I can see that's loud. Hello, so welcome to Charles Darwin House, where shortly we're going to be live at the Science is Vital AGM, due to start at 6:30. We're just testing everything, so let us know if you can see and hear us. Tweet away.
Hello. Hello. Science is Vital AGM will be starting sometime in the next 10 or 15 minutes. We're just testing the levels on our second microphone. I hope all of you guys listening out there on the live stream can hear me. So now you can see me as well with any luck. Hi, it's Andrew here from the Science is Vital AGM. We're going to be kicking off in about 10 or 15 minutes, as I think I just said, and we're just testing the levels on our second microphone.
So what are we expecting today?
So we've got a keynote address from David Willits to start off proceedings, and then we're going to be going through some of our plans for the year to come, and we're going to be ditching most of our executive committee. Most of them are stepping down today, so it's going to be all change for Science is Vital.
And when's this all kicking off?
So we'll be starting the live stream proper in about 10 or 15 minutes when the AGM starts at 6:30.
And where are we?
So we're here in Charles Darwin House in London, and we're just, as I say, testing out that second microphone. That's a confirmation, so thanks everyone. See you again in a minute.
Science is Vital's 2016 annual general meeting. I'm delighted to see you all here today on this hot and sticky day. We are expecting a speech from Mr. Willis. He's not here yet, so I suggest that because we have a very tight schedule, that we just kick off with the boring stuff. And when Mr. Willis walks through that door, we will wind that up and let him speak and then carry on. So I just need to tell you that there are no fire drills planned today. So if the alarm goes off, that away. You need to go out these doors here and leave the building. And that is it, basically. I think we should start. So without further ado, we will kick off with minutes of the previous meeting, starring Andrew Steele. You need to speak into the microphone for the live stream. Hello, world.
Hello, everybody. Well, we published the minutes of the previous meeting online. In those minutes, we documented the fact that we elected or re-elected the members of the Executive Committee, and we then had a long discussion about the possible directions for Science is Vital for 2015. Are there any matters arising? I'm guessing not. In that case, can I have a vote to approve the minutes of the last meeting back in 2015? Everyone who's in favour, raise your hand. I think that's quorum. So the minutes of the last meeting are duly passed.
Splendid. Okay, now we get on to the chair's report. I'm the chair of Science is Vital. My name is Jenny Roan, if you don't know me. We had a rather busy year last year, and I've lost my, zipping through that. Yes, so as you all know, last year we had a different government, and the only exciting thing on the horizon was the 2015 spending review, which in retrospect now seems rather far away. But it was quite urgent because there were talks of cuts, and we were concerned that there'd be problems. Andrew Steele at Scienceogram had done some really beautiful work on how real-term spending for UK science has been going down and will continue to fall if nothing is done. And indeed, we were the first to basically break the story that spending for public science had fallen below 0.5% GDP. So we took consultation as widely as possible about what we might do, including multiple meetings with the Campaign for Science and Engineering, the learned societies, and our own membership as to what actions would be the most effective to try to stave off any more cuts. And those of you, I don't know if you were paying attention, but we did have a really nice Postcards to George campaign. How many of you did a postcard? Oh, excellent. We got about, how many did we get? 1,500 postcards, beautiful things, and it was such a shame to actually deliver them to George Osborne because they were just wonderful objects. And we do have an online gallery of those, really nice work. So that was delivered to the Treasury. We managed not to get arrested in the process, which was a win. Okay, then of course we had our rally at Conway Hall, which was a lot of fun. Who was there? Yes, it was a really inspirational night. There was fun, there was seriousness, it was a nice mix. There was some drunken rallying as well from Mark Miodovnik. It was a wonderful evening, and I'm really proud that we made that great effort to tell the world that science is vital. We've gotten, as always, we've continued to have a lot of good press coverage. We are approached by the press quite regularly to give quotes during times of crisis or other news about science. We did very well last year. Here are some examples of that. However, I'm going to keep this very short. The challenge was, and now will even be more so in the future, to be noticed by government, by people. There are a lot of competing interests out there. There are a lot of things that have changed a lot since last year, as you all know. We were already struggling to be heard after the resignation of David Willits. After he left, the new science minister was not as approachable. We did send letters to Joe Johnson. We didn't get a reply beyond just a formal thank you for your letter. So it's already been a challenge to get the attention of government, and I think that is only going to get worse as everything has changed. And we'll talk a lot more about that when we do our really exciting brainstorm sessions. Is he here? No. Okay. So that's my report for the last year. I think we did a really nice job on the spending review campaign. Very proud of that. But now we have a completely different landscape, and we need to come up with some new tricks to keep the momentum going. Okay, so with that, we will go on to the very exciting finance report from Shane McCracken. Wait for live stream, you must speak into the mic.
Just because we have to do this because we're a constituted organisation. There are 2 years to report on, so it's double the pleasure. In the year ending, our finance year goes from the 1st of September through to the 31st of August, and in 2014-15, we really didn't spend much and didn't get much. It was about 130 quid either way, and we ended up with just under £1,900 in the bank at the end of it. But it was much more exciting in 2015-16, where strange enough, we didn't get any membership dues. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but we didn't hold an AGM. We had a bunch of donations, just under £300, and our Conway Hall event, after Eventbrite taken their enormous stake, gave us just under £2,000. But we spent just over £2,000 on the Conway Hall event, plus a whole bunch of communication costs and the Dear George postcard campaign, bringing our reserves now down to £621.98. Has anyone got any questions about it? I'd like to query it? Brilliant. We'll move on.
Thank you, Shane. Membership report, we just keep this very brief. We have, the members that we have renew every year. So everyone in this room who paid their dues is now a member. We have 53 of you. However, in addition to membership, Science is Vital also measures its participation by our mailing group. So in 2010, we amassed 35,000 signatures on a petition, which we transferred into a mailing list. But last year we decided that we wanted to cleanse that list because there were a lot of postdocs who'd moved on and people who maybe weren't as engaged. So we asked people to opt in, and we got 1,400 people opting in. So we feel very confident that these people, hopefully you're all on that list, and if you're not, you can talk to one of us tonight. We're confident that everybody on the list is engaged. So that's 1,400 people, plus the members. We have people, but we need more people. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, so without further ado, that leads us very nicely into our first brainstorming discussion. I think there's meant to be slides along with this to keep up with. Okay, so in the next 10 minutes or so, what we really want to solicit are your ideas. We talk to each other all the time, but we don't have a lot of chance for consultation. And I'll just set out what we have. So in November, on the 23rd of November, there will be a spending review, which will be set out by the new chancellor, who is a bit of an unknown. He's a black box. We don't really know what he thinks about science. We had a pretty good idea what the previous government thought about science. The only thing we really know is that Theresa May sent a very positive letter to Paul Nurse about the importance of science funding, but it was a very short note. We don't know anything about Hammond. The only thing that he said that I've seen is that he really wants to support bankers, and which is, somebody's got to do it. But we don't really know what's going on in the head of Hammond or in the Treasury. We have heard that the science team in the Treasury is still very much on message. They do understand the link between science and the economy. They buy that argument. But the problem is that the voices at the top are now different people. So we perhaps need to make the case afresh that science is vital. And unfortunately, it's already September. We're nearing the end of September. The spending review is in November. There isn't a lot we can do. And indeed, we're not really sure if anything that we will do will have much of an effect. Nevertheless, I'd like to hear your ideas for anything that we might do to perhaps foment a little rebellion or get a profile going, raise awareness of the fact that we think science is vital. Any ideas at all? I think the floor is open. Do we have a roving microphone? Or just that one? Okay. I'm going to rove. Who wants to say something? Don't be shy. Any ideas at all, no matter how silly, as long as they don't involve abseiling down large buildings. It could be anything. It could be letter writing to your MPs. It can be selfies, social media campaign. Andrew.
Hello. So I think, given the short amount of time that we have available to us, and given, as Jenny's laid out, all kinds of reasons that science is fairly low down on the government's agenda at the moment, particularly with all this Brexit stuff going on, I think what we can probably hope to achieve is raising a little bit of profile and perhaps trying to get people to write to their MPs, because that's a useful way of trying to find, it gives our supporters almost something to do, and that's something I'll talk a bit more about when we're talking about building our support base. But I think it's important to make sure that people do have this opportunity to engage, and it also gives them a chance to set out to their MP the sort of concern of the scientific community, which I think is not very widely acknowledged. And I also think it's important that we do, to some extent, draw attention away from the Brexit debate, because that's going to dominate politics for the next who knows how many years. And consequently, it's very important that we do put some pressure on MPs and realise that they are being watched and scrutinised on the domestic science budget as well.
Hi, I'm Snezhina from UCL. So I just wanted to say that it would be really good if we can get non-scientist people on board, because we are kind of have conflict of interest in all of this, and so having any action or initiatives where we would link to arts community or something like that will kind of help us out. I think that would be really good.
Let's get Stephen next. Stephen?
Was just going to follow on from what Andrew said. I mean, I know Brexit is going to dominate things, and we're going to come on to Brexit in a minute, but actually one of the things that's come out of the news coverage on that is actually a slightly higher profile for the science budget and for the the impact that that's had. The BBC has picked up and covered it, and the national newspapers too. So I think there may be sensitivity there that we can maybe continue to exploit.
There was since it's EU, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, just to link into that, I think that, Mike Goldsworthy, scientist for EU. I think it makes a lot of sense to link up and collaborate on this, because we did a survey of the impact on scientists after the Brexit vote, and we had over 400 entries, and one of the top issues was the national funding level, because the concern is that if we don't have more juice in the tank, then the overall impact is going to be very harsh, and we don't have chips on the table for when we go in renegotiating for our relationship on the EU science programme. So I think this is something very much in the minds of some politicians, but not all, and we're very happy to work closely with you guys on upping your social media profile, because we get about 1 million to 1.4 million views on Facebook a week now. So if we can twin that up, but then also when you approach MPs, instead of just writing letters, it would be good to have some kind of like fact sheet or brochure that we all go and send to them, and we can co-brand it or something like that. But I think linking it in would be powerful, and then taking it on a local level to MPs is a good way to do it.
So when we did our last letter writing campaign, we did put together a bit of a kit, so a template, not a template, but just suggestions of what to say, and we had a fact sheet, I believe. So yeah, definitely happy to collaborate on that, I think. I think it's a good idea. Was there one over here before I? No, okay.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Hunt. I co-organised a letter post-Brexit about to try and raise awareness. I was just going to say that I think that tying in the current the autumn statement with Brexit would be a really good idea from a scientist's perspective as well, because I think that Brexit is a really emotive issue for a lot of young scientists out there. We got a huge response in a very short period of time, and so I think that if you were to use that as a way to engage lots of scientists and people outside the science community, it would be a very good starting point for the campaign.
Nigel Brown, geriatric microbiologist. John Kingman has moved from number 2 in the Treasury to chair of UKRI. Have we actually tried to contact him? Because he was certainly a friend at court.
We haven't, but I've heard that he's still very much, although he's no longer inside, he's still making a lot of noise about the importance of science for the economy. So no, we haven't contacted him, but Campaign for Science and Engineering feels that he's still on side and should be engaging. He will be engaging on the behalf of scientists, but no, I haven't. That's a good idea. Over here.
I mean, does the campaign tend to accent on vital science won't get done? I mean, another pitch is people who will be the next generation will leave and not get trained. I mean, it seems to be because the loss of funding inevitably impacts strongly on training and on final year students in universities and anybody who might be interested in a research career. And so there's been a lot of talk about this in the context of Brexit, hasn't there? Of, what you're damaging, particularly the young. And I think that applies in science as much as anything else. And I just wonder whether that's worth emphasising.
I think it is. I mean, we've done work on science careers, and we did a really nice report about that. And so it's not out of our remit. I think last year we focused on the science budget because we felt we had limited resources, and we did that. But there's absolutely no reason why. I mean, these are all very important issues, and we need to decide. I must say, we've just recently gotten a lot of new volunteers, so it's possible that we'll be able to do a lot more than we have been able to do in the past. So, yes, it's a good idea. Should we go back to Mike?
Hi, yeah, about Brexit in science, just to put a more positive spin on it, because a lot of people are concerned that, here are doomsayers again, saying everything that's going down. How do you actually spin it round so that it's more inspiring? Now, one of the things is all of the Olympics and all of the investment into the technology behind those teams brought success. We are all so excellent at science. We are the most efficient scientists in the world, according to recent data. That's one. Also, with all these trade deals that people want to be opening up around this world, this new fetish that they have, well, what is it that we're going to be trading? What is our greatest export? And it's our knowledge economy, our know-how, our tech, our education, and our skills and services in this very high-value area. So I think that we should also be putting the very positive spin on what we can do for the economy, rather than just saying, if we don't do it, we're going to get hurt as well. Feel sorry for us, because then people don't.
Yes.
Ben Britton, Imperial College. So two things that are coming up in addition to Brexit is, one, the restructuring of the research councils and the consequences of that on the landscape in terms of the political and the potential for infighting between the councils as they get restructured in that scheme. And I think working out where we want to sit with that would be useful. The second thing is that in the last flat cash settlement, the ODA assistance effectively enabling us to leverage and keep a flat cash, that is very high within the Research Council, certainly within EPSRC. And then looking at how they leverage to the knowledge economy towards developing nations, etc., that is certainly gaining traction moving forward. So something looking towards this autumn statement, which is likely to be dominated by Brexit statements with respect to settling EU cash, but also moving forward to what's the next stage of our funding landscape would be quite useful.
We have about 1 more minute for this slot. Is there any other comments, questions, ideas? Shane, do you want to? I'll run the mic to you.
I missed the very first bit of it, so maybe it was covered. But what I've just heard there is a lot of messages, and very good messages and strong messages that need to be got to someone. My question is, what about ideas about mechanisms for getting those messages, and to whom? I hope that's grammatically correct.
Okay, let's ponder that and go on, because this will come up again in all the other discussions. I think now it's time to move on to the next, nicely segueing into planning for Brexit negotiations. I believe this is going to be chaired by Andrew. Stephen, sorry. Stephen, here you go. Over to you.
Well, 20 minutes before the meeting, I was asked to do it. That's the way we like to rock and roll. Well, as everybody knows, and we've already been discussing it, we did have a referendum, and it went the way that most members of the scientific community didn't want it to go. And so now we've got a major problem on our hands. We know that if Britain does go through with Article 50 and we leave the EU, then we've got a problem accessing EU research funds, which is providing currently around 10% of the public R&D budget. And so that's something that we want to resist, I think. Oh, am I not? Oh, okay. I beg your pardon. So EU R&D mechanisms are very important for us, and those of us, of course, who are working scientists know from the experience of our careers how important it is and how enriching it has been to be able easily to collaborate and access European-funded facilities and collaborate with our colleagues across Europe, and also then, of course, to benefit from the influx of colleagues and staff and students from the EU as well, which, of course, up to now has relied on freedom of movement. And that is something that I think, from the tenor of all the things that the government has said, and it has been fairly bland in what it's said about the implications of Brexit, I think the freedom of movement aspect is the thing that is most at risk politically and is politically dangerous for us. The other aspect of the debate, and I'm not sure whether it's something that we as an organization, as a small organization, can touch upon, but it was raised by Snitjana's point earlier, is that one of the things that came out was a certain disparaging attitude towards experts and expertise and the scientific community as well. And there was a sense of a disconnect between us as a generally metropolitan elite, and I apply that also to members, people who work in regional universities well outside London. Welcome, Austin. And then the people of the country who, from their perspective, saw no value in their continued membership of the EU, and for whom, the fact that it enriches and sustains the scientific enterprise of this country, wasn't a major consideration for them. It was a hit they were prepared to take. And I think there is a gulf there that generally the scientific community does need to think about addressing. Whether or not we as an organization have resources to plug into that, I don't know, but maybe it's something that we can continue to work with scientists for EU on. But I do think that actually the whole Brexit debate, it is going to be, dominate the political agenda for years to come. And I do think, I have sensed, as I said earlier, that the risks that it poses to Britain's reputation as a scientific nation are palpable, are acknowledged, I think, by major players in the media, in television and national newspapers. And so I think there's probably good lines there, good pressure points that we certainly want to exploit, so that we make sure that that message is getting through. And I think there is a sense that it is coming through. Greg Clark, who is in charge of the R&D budget, at the moment, was said before the select committee today that they do have an industrial policy, and they do know that the scientific research component of that is a very important component of that. And so in his previous experience as David Willett's successor, he knows very well, I think, the importance of the scientific agenda in this country. So I think the Brexit, it's a challenge, but I think it also gives us opportunities, and there's pressure points that have come with it that I think we definitely want to think about exploiting. How exactly we're going to go about that? Well, I guess the floor is open unless we need to get David Willett in. Okay.
Park the Brexit debate for just a few minutes while we hear from Mr. Willett. I'm so pleased that you managed to squeeze us in with 3 other engagements. It's a pleasure to welcome you here today to give us some inspirational words. And thank you. You're being live streamed across the UK, so.
You didn't tell me about the inspirational words. That's an extra bit of the remit. I wanted to come here today really because, first of all, to thank you for what you do as Science is Vital, and what you do in terms of making the case for science and campaigning for science. In fact, I would say science is vital is vital. So it's great what you do, and thank you very much for that. And I appreciate it as a minister, and do it now as a member of the House of Lords. Obviously, the big issue we've just been talking about and dominates the discussion is Brexit. And so I thought I should just briefly reflect on Brexit and what it means for science. And the first dispiriting point, I'm afraid, not inspirational point, is that here we had a very clear view from the science and research community about what was in the interests of science and research in the UK, and the Brexit argument defeated that view, 52-48. And so I think the first thing is lessons to learn from that. I think one lesson to learn was that a lot of the arguments that were made were financial arguments. We get more money out of the EU than we put in. And although that is true specifically for science, it's not, of course, true nationally on a simple-minded view of the EU budget. So immediately invited the trump card to be played. Well, hang on, if you're just worried about getting the money back, if getting your money out, more money out than in is a crucial argument, that's actually reason why, if you look at the budget contribution, we should leave, not a reason for staying, and we'll compensate you for the losses. So I think looking back, the argument was very financial, and didn't focus enough on the networks, the interaction, the crucial condition for getting a lot of EU funding, that institutes have to work with other institutes in more than one country, which drives networks and partnerships. And to be honest, I think Britain was not always as good in creating those networks or playing a role in those networks. I think of the work I had to do to try to raise our presence in the KIC networks that were being funded. And you looked at the map and you saw the Karolinska was linked to a Swiss university and linked to a Fraunhofer in Germany, and you didn't see enough connections with British institutes. So I think the one lesson from that is actually we didn't focus enough on connectedness and focused too much on money. Now, the result is what it is. I don't know which stage of grief you individually have reached. And from my experience, different people are at the different stages of grief. I can tell you where, from my observation, and obviously I'm no longer a member of the government, where I think the government is, and they are saying, look, first of all, and most importantly now, we've got to think about what we do with opportunities for science. And whilst there are, of course, a whole host of practical negotiating issues that will come up during Brexit, issues about participation in Horizon 2020 and such like, my very strong advice to the science community is to begin by thinking outside the box. Are there things that are more possible now? And I know it's hard for people who overwhelmingly wanted us to stay within the EU, but one of my frustrations, and I'm sure of scientists in this room, was there were areas where the EU regime was very restrictive. For the social scientists, what they were proposing to do on access to data would have made a lot of classic social science and research very hard to do if you weren't able to, if you need everybody's specific consent to the use of their data. And I think there were some deep philosophical questions about whether suffering from a disease is a private fact or legitimate public information, which requires to be shared, so obviously suitably anonymized. But I think that you could imagine a situation in which Britain had a different regime on data than the EU. Now, this would require a domestic debate, a very lively domestic debate about exactly the right balance between protections for privacy and confidentiality against using big data sets for the purposes of research. But that argument will be starting to run. People will be trying to work out what the data regime should be, and the science community should make its voice heard in that. Another vivid example is GM, where there were blocking minorities across the EU that have made it very hard to make progress on GM. This is now going to become a national responsibility. Does the science community want to make the case for GM? Is it a technology that we attach importance to? I thought when there was the more recent attempt at stopping very modest experiments in GM crops in 2013, I think it was great the way the science community engaged with the skeptics. And I think we made modest progress compared with how GM had been left. I remember going to a science festival where they had an exhibit of a set of, I think they were tomato plants or pea plants or something. And some of them were manky, misshapen objects, and others were vigorous, flourishing, fecund. And the question for the school kids going through the exhibit was, which of those is the GM tomato plant? And they all chose the most misshapen, ugliest one because they knew that GM was a bad thing and this is what it did. When, of course, actually, it was the flourishing one that was the GM crop. And it just brought home to me how some very simple kind of scientific messages had not got home. Those will become a national responsibility. So, and it is very important to get into this mindset. What are they going to be? Because otherwise the science community will find itself suffering a second defeat. It will find a set of national regulations that are written which don't take advantage of the opportunity that's presented. So that's one thing to do. Another thing to do is to think about scientific links across the world. And we've got strong natural links with the US. In the last few years, we've grown links with China. But look at the connections that can be made with science and researchers around the world. They already exist. But again, I think there'll be a lot of interest. I believe there's going to be a Commonwealth Science Conference, which I think the Royal Society is involved in planning. So look globally. And my advice then is, if you do those two things, think about areas where innovation may be easier. Look at relationships you can build outside Europe. At that point, having gone through that mindset, you will find that there is more of an audience within government and across politics and in the media when you say, and as well as this, we're doing these things. We understand the world is changing. We're doing these things. But in addition to this, we really do need the best possible link to Horizon 2020. We do really need not to sever the links that we've got in research programs that are already underway. So my advice, and it's kind of tactical advice in a way, is just going for a continuity EU strategy is not necessarily the best ways of protecting the interests of science and research in today's political environment. Show that you recognise there's been a democratic vote, a decision has been made to Brexit, shows that consequences follow from that, and then say, as well as that, we do need to stay in touch with our European partners, and then you participate in really what is quite an intricate and tricky situation. Do we directly continue to contribute to Horizon 2020? Do we run a parallel scheme that doesn't involve contributing to it, but kind of involves directly matching it? Do we try to, how is the Swiss negotiation going on their links to the EU science community? Do we try to make common cause with Switzerland? Because to be honest, the UK and Switzerland are both very serious science players in the EU. Do we negotiate jointly with Switzerland on scientific arrangements? So there are all those type of issues, and they can be addressed alongside the other approaches I suggested. So I know that it's been very difficult for people. I know there's a lot of uncertainty. The fact that my successors, Joe and Greg, have been able already to secure assurances from the Treasury about funding carrying on for projects that have already been agreed, I think is a very useful first step. Theresa wrote to Paul Nurse very early on when she became Prime Minister, signalling that she understood the importance of the science and research relationship and was committed to that. So I hope that at the end of the day, we continue to have what is clearly essential, close working relationships with our friends in Europe. In addition, just possibly some innovations and some new relationships that would not otherwise have contemplated. Thank you very much indeed.
Time for a few questions?
Yeah, just a couple of them. Yeah, Guy there. Yeah.
How would you best recommend scientists engage with yourself and colleagues moving forward?
Well, I would say that fleshing out some of the specifics, first of all, advised by our chief scientists and others, I had a kind of working list of areas where I thought EU regulations were impeding scientific progress. But that's got to be kept up to date, and it requires above all the input of the science community. What would such a list look like today is a very useful scientific exercise that bodies like the Royal Society and Science is Vital and others can contribute to. And as I say, secondly, there is exactly how we link to the EU in future is a very complicated, intricate question. And across our universities, there should be people who are capable of thinking through and advising on all that. That's a second area where I know there is some ad hoc work going on in individual universities, but it isn't straightforward. And paying into Horizon 2020 just as a sort of membership fee is only one option. And when you start looking at it close up, you discover the Swiss arrangement is a bit different from the Norwegian arrangement, and then there's what the Israelis do, and you start finding that there are lots of subtle differences. And we didn't used to have to worry about that, but raising the level of understanding of these different types of relationships and leading a conversation about the pros and cons of each one would be really helpful. Yeah, Jennifer.
I think that we should play to our strengths, which may be lobbying trying to influence these incredibly complicated. It's a loaded question. Sorry. I sort of feel like it's a little bit too much for this little group, but can you see a role for us more in the raising awareness?
Yeah, and look, and I was at a meeting. I mean, it was a group of peers meeting, but I was with the PM this afternoon and mentioned science and the science negotiations that will be underway. There will be a question for ministers, which is as they assemble their negotiating position for the Brexit negotiations, where science is on the list of issues. There's the city lobbying for continuing participation in the single market. There will be the agricultural sector. There will be the creative industries. And you're absolutely right, and I should have said this. So the more that the voice of science is heard, not just at the elite level, but by people putting pressure on their MPs and in the media, that this is an important part of negotiations. You want science and the research relationship to be in the top 5, not number 17 in the list of negotiating issues for Brexit. And that, you're absolutely right, that is not just elite Westminster politics, that's also politicians judging the relative significance of this to the average voter. Yeah. The last question then, and sadly I'm going to have to go.
So moving away from science funding briefly, immigration is obviously quite an important topic within the Brexit debate. It's very important for science to have free movement of people and ideas. How do you think we should phrase our sort of ongoing requirement for free movement of people within the sort of future debate?
I think that is an argument that is very important. I mean, just showing what works, what is achieved by virtue of having a highly diverse international group of people working in Britain's research institutes and universities, I think that's very important. There is a belief in parts of government, I think it's mistaken. There's a belief that a lot of people who come over here under the guise of being students or researchers then stay. Now, I'm not sure how much of that happens, and the student overstaying problem, I think, is based on a misreading of the statistics. I think the bogus colleges that were being exploited like that have been closed down. But also making clear these are relationships where people come for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years and then make the scientific career is now mobile. And after you've done a spell here, you'll do a spell in the US or even a spell in China. So we're raising that understanding of just how science careers are shaped nowadays. Very important to explain. I'm sorry I have to leave now, but thank you very much for inviting me along. And we will get there. We will get there.
Well, that was very inspiring. Okay, I know you didn't mean to be inspiring, but okay. We still have. Wow, we're practically on schedule. We still have the 5 minutes remaining for the debate that Stephen kicked off and that Mr. Willits contributed to. So, yes, do you want to take the mic? And Austin has a comment here. What? Sorry.
Austin Elliott from a university not in London. I was just, in the context of this Brexit thing and the composition of laboratories, the best thing I've seen on social media was the one of people posting pictures of the labs and then sticking flags on to show you where the people came from. And I thought that was easily visually comprehensible, and it made the point brilliantly. So if you want a mass campaign, there's a mass campaign you could do.
Any other comments on campaigning on Brexit? Yep, here.
Hi, Laura Dowsett at UCL. I think just on sort of the topic of people being fed up with experts and talking to the general public, is there a way of engaging more rather than saying Horizon 2020? What does that mean in terms of what that actually funds and how does it affect the general public? I think maybe the general public engage most in science in terms of like scientific charities and things. Is there a way of showing what that funding connects to that directly affects their lives rather than just the big picture type thing.
I mean, I think that's an important aspect of it. I mean, the photographs of the international composition of many labs helps to send that message. The downside of that might be that it's been done. There was a flurry of it in the summer, and it might be difficult to reignite it. But it. Yeah.
But also, I think there's a role for our organisation, our group here, not just to do publicity stunts, but actually to work in gathering evidence. We did that very well 5 years ago, whenever it was, about some survey, I can't remember, careers, wasn't it? And, you know, we got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of detailed responses from people. And I think that's something that we can do as an organisation by providing that grassroots information about what opportunities are being lost, what opportunities are being gained elsewhere, some sort of mapping exercise to show, rather than just with flags, but with some numbers and evidence about how interconnected science is. So I just, you know, I'd like to move thinking on about being more scientific, maybe. I'm a marketeer.
Other comments or suggestions? Mike.
Yeah, just to follow that up, whenever anyone goes out and does a survey or gathers information, just make it a little report. We can put it out through all the media, you know, Independent and Guardian are obvious. If you get it in the Daily Mail, you're lucky. But the more that it's constantly visible, the more that people think that it is part of the overall debate, and politicians think that it's part of the overall debate. There's a great book I'm reading at the moment called The War on Science by Sean Otto in the States. The big problem they have there is their science journalism is dropping completely. Over the years, it is fallen out of a lot of their media systems because it's not getting included in the political debate, so it's just getting sidelined. And so what we need to do is we actually need to make sure that science is political in terms of the solutions it offers in health, the solutions it offers in energy, but then also how it's a very important part of growing jobs in this country. So one of the most interesting facts from the book was that half of the US's growth since World War II can be attributable to science and technology. That's phenomenal. So because the US have invested massively in it. So what we need to do is make sure that the reports coming through like that get written up nicely, and then we just hammer it through all of our media friends that we have and just make sure that the issue is alive, 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 and keep it going on social media. That's what we need to be doing.
Hi, this is Shikta from Imperial. I think one thing which I really liked from David's talk was the emphasizing the point that we should accept this democratic decision and we should sort of move forward towards that. I think there's so much we can do internally and then sort of pull together and try and combine this with EU together. So I think that is a very positive message which we can support as a group and take it forward.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't think we want to underestimate what David Willits understands about, you know, good tactical maneuvers when negotiating with government, since he obviously was on the inside for quite a long time. So, you know, I think the positive suggestions that he made are definitely something that we want to think seriously about and take on board. And before I wrap up this section, obviously we'll be thinking about Brexit for quite a long time now. Here we go.
I thought it was very interesting the way that Lord Willits emphasised what positive aspects we should focus on. But it seemed to me like, in some ways, they were almost the opposite of the key things that we might lose out of from leaving the EU. It feels like access to Horizon 2020 is really important, but it might ultimately be replaceable if we were sufficiently able to lobby the government for replacement of funding. But it doesn't feel like free movement of people is ever going to be replaceable. That's something that is something that if we don't have, then we're never going to get those people into the country. And yet the things which were being emphasised, I guess, were to do with legislation and funding rather than immigration. And so I think if there's some way we can raise the importance of immigration up the the agenda for government, or make them aware that that's a really important priority for science as a whole, then I'm all for that.
I agree. That's an important point, and although he made some very interesting points, we don't want to base our whole strategy for campaigning on what some ex-minister says. Okay, particularly. So we have our own views, and we haven't always seen eye to eye with the government on that. Freedom of movement is something I think is very vulnerable, but we've obviously got to make the point that we do rely on the easy exchange of people between countries, because many of us have benefited from that in our own careers and from the influx of people in our own labs. But we have also, I in my own lab have hired people from outside the EU, and it's a bit more paperwork, but it can be done. And as long as we can at least push to make that is as light touch as possible, if we have to live with that, then we can work with it. But we obviously want to get the best possible solution. And to my mind, freedom of movement is the best possible solution, because I'm still at the tail end of denial.
Do we actually have statistics on what, for the research-intensive universities, what percentage of graduate students and undergraduates are from other countries?
Do we have statistics on? I think that information is probably, we can find it somehow. Pardon? The question was, do we have statistics on the sort of percentages of students and staff from overseas working in UK universities? I think many of the universities probably have it themselves, but if it's in the public domain, I don't know. Universities UK have the overview. Okay, I think we need to move on. So next item on the agenda is...
Hello, I'm just going to move straight on without Jenny introducing me. I'm the Vice Chair of Science is Vital, and I'm going to be talking on the next two sections, which are probably because they're kind of linked together. And the first of them is campaigning out to 2020, so where we see the campaign going in the more distant future. We've talked a little bit about the spending review and how we can't really do a huge amount. It's definitely worth trying, but we can't do a huge amount to influence that in the short term. So what is our sort of longer term campaign goal? And I'd like to set a big aim, which is I'd like to get a commitment to spending 0.8% of GDP on science, which is a goal we had a couple of years ago. I'm going to try and stick to that goal in every party's manifesto for the 2020 election. Now, I think that that's a very important thing to do. It's completely possible to get this as a cross-party consensus. There's no party that hates science, with the possible exception of UKIP. So it's definitely something that we could try to get people to do. And ultimately, in the back of our minds, and this is more sort of for the next section, which is going to be about engaging more and more, sorry, I'm sounding too close to the live stream, it's going to be with engaging more and more people with Science is Vital and getting the message out more widely. We're going to talk about that in the next section, so try and ignore that for now. I know it's very difficult to separate these things out, but the ultimate question is how can we get thousands of people across the country in every single constituency to contact their MP and tell them that science is vital to them? So that's sort of the big campaign goal here. And ultimately, that's going to feed into being able to get this thing into the manifestos. So I thought I'd just start by reminding everybody what the situation is right now. And this is going back to some numbers that some of you might have seen little bits of this talk before. This is from my Sciencegram set of statistics. The government spends about 700 billion quid every single year on all of our behalves. That doesn't make any sense. So what I like to do is divide it up into pounds per person per year. When you do that, we've got 64 million people in the UK, and that's about £11,500 per person. So suddenly that makes a bit more sense to me. It's about the same as my rent or maybe a year's salary or something like that. And out of that £11,500, just £160, so less than 1.5%, goes on all government R&D. So let's try and break that down into an individual area, because I still don't really know what that £160 means. If we're thinking about health, and imagine these are 10 people in the UK, what is it that's going to kill them? Well, cancer kills about a third of us, and we spend just £2.80 per person per year on public funded cancer research. Now, if that seems crazy, what's even crazier is that cancer is arguably the best funded condition. Heart disease kills about half as many, and we spend £1.20 per person per year on research. And stroke kills 10% of people, and we spend just 69 pence per person per year researching it. So ultimately, these are the sort of numbers that make me think it's very, very important that we are looking to significantly increase the amount we spend on science. We can talk about percentages of GDP, and we'll continue to do so, because that's a useful way to communicate this to politicians. But ultimately, these tiny numbers are what I care about. So what's the science budget look like? Well, Jenny showed us in her talk the sort of story we broke back at the last spending review. Things have changed slightly since then. So you might have heard about the commitment to freeze the science budget, not in cash terms, but in real terms. So this blue line here is the science budget from 2010 up to 2015, using 2010-11 as a baseline. It's actually been frozen in real terms out to 2020. So assuming no jiggery pokery has been done, and I'll talk about that in a second, then that budget is going to be flatlining. So this is why ultimately we need to be setting all the parties on a path to increase that number. Now, arguably, real terms isn't actually the measure that we should be using for science funding, because science affects every single person in the UK. So per person might be quite a good way of looking at it. When you do that calculation, obviously the population of the UK is slowly increasing, in part due to those terrible EU immigrants we've been talking about earlier. And that means that the science funding per person is decreasing by somewhere between 5 and 10% by 2020 compared to 2010. And finally, you might look at this as a fraction of GDP. Now, I'll confess these GDP figures don't take into account the fact that we might be Brexiting, so that'll actually make the statistic look slightly better, but not for good reasons. So there are two ways you can fiddle with this, are adjust the numerator or the denominator. I'm hoping that we can do something about the one on top and increase the amount of money we put into science. Because if the projections back in 2015 were correct, our science budget would be about 20% smaller as a fraction of GDP than it was then. So this is sort of the context in which I think this campaign needs to sit. Globally speaking, this was the graph in the story that we broke. It shows the UK trailing right at the back of the G8 group of countries. It's not really a company we want to be keeping, with less than 0.5%. So not only are we at the back of the G8, we're lower than any G8 country in the last 20 years. And the reason we've chosen 20 years isn't because we're cherry picking, it's as far back as the data goes, so it might be longer than that still. So again, this is just a huge pressure point. I don't think international comparisons are the most meaningful way to address this, but clearly, whatever you think of percentages of GDP, we shouldn't be at the very back of this group of countries. So that's just that graph shown in sort of bar chart form. We're behind the G8, we're behind the OECD, we're behind the rest of the EU on average as well. So clearly the UK really, really needs to up its game from an international perspective. So that's our aim, and what I'd like to hear are what people think of that goal initially, because we're going to be talking about how to get that to happen in the next section. And yeah, just what sort of people's comments are on whether that's achievable and whether they'd like to see anything else, and how, and then we'll sort of move on to how we would campaign for that. So does anyone have any comments on that as a goal and as a plan? Yeah, we got one down here.
Okay. Just a quick question around how you got to the 0.8 figure. How did you decide on 0.8?
That is a good question. The answer is that at the time when we did that campaign, that was the G8 average. Now, unfortunately, it's no longer the G8 average. So that is actually one argument that it's not a particularly meaningful number. And I'd be open to changing that if we feel that that undermines it sufficiently that it's no longer a target we should be aiming for. But yeah, so it's a little bit out of date, but it was the G8 average. The G8 average now is more like 0.7.
Yeah, I think it's kind of weird to go for percentage of GDP because it really matters how many people are engaged in doing research. What is the GDP? You know, if our GDP drops, raising it to 0.8% doesn't make any sense, you know. So we need to have somewhat more objective estimate, and then, yeah.
There was a reason we did go for 0.8, which was that the 0.7 commitment of GDP to foreign aid was a very successful campaign that a large part of the population were able to buy into and understand. And so we were stealing their best ideas, really, and coming up with a similar message that we feel people would be able to understand, which is less likely perhaps to be a moving target than a fixed figure, which I think would be more likely to move with various factors like inflation, etc.
Stephen as well.
I was just wondering whether we could replace the 0.8% by adopting the scienceogram approach and calculate what we think we should spend in pounds per person, and then that is maybe a simple way to do it.
I think the problem with that, I would love that idea. I think that's exactly the way we should be thinking about it. But the problem is that when you say £160 per person, which is the overall R&D spend, I think at that point that doesn't mean anything to me. And so that's with the total figure. However, you could say something like, I think we should spend £50 per person per year on life-saving research, and think about dividing it up in terms of numbers of deaths.
So listening to rhetoric that's happening from the research councils and certainly from the Royal Academy of Engineering, the impact agenda and justifying to son of biz science funding is towards this leverage science. One of the big risks of EU funding is that's blue skies moving forwards. I think if we leverage purely against saving lives, keeping lights on, etc., we're going to miss the long-term growth, which certainly from my career, I'm looking to a 40-year problem of science rather than just how I'm going to fund the next jet engine.
I was just wondering, given that we're the best country in terms of getting ERC research grants, how much does that boost the percentage that we currently have, and can we use that as a starting point to say we need to replace that missing funding?
Yeah, so the number that we keep using for the EU is it's about 10%, so it's about 0.05 of that 0.5%. It's a little bit complicated, but that's basically the answer. So that would be a reasonable start. Yeah.
I think the idea of trying to get something in every party manifesto is an extremely good one. What worries me slightly, of course, is the party manifestos are designed to distinguish parties from one another. So if you persuade them all to have the same message on science, you dilute the sense in which they want it to be an important headline message because it's not differentiating them from other parties. How do you overcome that problem?
I think that's right, but I think we need to be aware that we've got absolutely no idea what's going to happen in that next election. So we need to cover all our bases.
I guess that all the manifestos are going to say they want to support the NHS. So, science is just as important, maybe, we could argue.
We've got a couple of comments over here as well.
Yeah, Tristram Wyatt. I think the London Cycling Campaign did manage to get all the candidates for the mayoral campaigns to sign up, apart from UKIP, to putting more money into cycling. And I think, in a funny kind of way, taking it out of politics and getting everybody to agree was actually a very helpful thing. And it meant that after the election, whoever got elected, the campaign could go back and say, you said.
I mean, on the political agenda, for those of us who come outside London, I'll remind you that there's a country to the north that has a separate election that's also banned GM. So I think, some of the issues around political parties are not that straightforward. And I would add SNP to UKIP in your selection of parties that are a little bit anti-science.
In terms of your number and how you frame the campaign, it seems to me that both the approaches, they're targeted at different audiences. I mean, the pounds per year approach is what you want to be doing for the general public. I mean, if you really have a lever to make hundreds of people tell their MP that they think science research is important, that is it. And we can see when people care about this because, when a relative has died of heart disease or something, that's when people donate to the British Heart Foundation. But I think, obviously, I don't imagine politicians are susceptible to these kind of arguments, except when they're getting lots of letters. I mean, I think for them, yes, absolutely. I'm sure their think tanks are targeted more on percentage of GDP and 40-year horizons. But I think for communicating to the public, those numbers are what you want. There's no doubt about it. Didn't see that.
The British Social Attitude Survey is repeated every year, and the same questions are asked year on year, and science continues to come out very strongly across a broad range of social categories. So I kind of would prefer to use that as in sort of propaganda rather than, the political scene is shifting, the party labels are becoming fuzzy and so on. Let's say, look, and particularly the Brexit demographic is very strongly supportive of science. So I think as a propaganda tool, that would be kind of useful.
Are there any more comments, or Shane?
Just in defence of the 0.8, I fully appreciate the £160 per person is terrible. What should it be? I mean, we'll come up with a figure, say, 250? And that's 250 in 2020, but what happens if the population starts increasing? Should it be 210 then, or should it be 230, or is it the same? But then you start getting in different ways that government doesn't budget, and by putting a 0.8 of GDP is something that actually government's been held down to before, something which they understand and it's working in their terms, and I think that's understandable for the public too.
Sorry. I noticed that in 2010 when we said our message was to increase science funding, all the other learning societies and charities were on board immediately. They signed up to our website. But the minute we put a number on it, it just, everybody said, oh, we can't commit to that number because we don't, we haven't come up with the figure. So I wonder sometimes if it is not a good idea to put a specific number on in order to, because Campaign for Science and Engineering was kind enough to have a few words with me a few days ago, and they think it's really important that the scientific community speaks with a unified message, that there be one overarching message that everybody's nibbling away at in their own special way. So I'm a little bit hesitant about the number. I always have been. I wonder whether we ought to ditch it. But then what do you replace it with? An increase. That's a bit woolly. So.
Yeah, and I think the other problem with an increase is the current government would claim they are increasing the science budget because it is in cash terms. It's really wiggly, so it's hard. I agree.
Yeah, well, in terms of if everyone promises 0.8, I think you can have a slight negative motivation there, as we used to say in animal studies, which is you can tell all the parties, oh, you don't want to be the one that's got the lowest promise, do you? I think that's a good thing to do with the public. Just say, look at how we're underfunding. I mean, compared to other countries, and in terms of your health and what you're actually paying in per year. And I think that can go right across the population with those messages. And then you go to the politicians and say, well, I've heard the other parties, they're all going to be increasing it because everyone knows this now. Have you got a number down? Think about it.
Run over into this corner.
Okay, so I'm Erica's a question for the room first. Does anyone here not work in academia? There are a few of you around. Okay, I'm not the only one. Okay, so I think that Science is Vital has a big representation from academia, but I'm aware I can't, and I wanted to be quite clear because I know on tape that I can't speak for my industry, I just speak for myself, but I'm aware that the same concerns that exist in the academic community, they exist in industry as well. We've been quite, I say we, the industry has been quite shocked at the Brexit result. And I think when you're talking about a unified message, that it might be important if you want to make something of the campaign to start to unify with the parallel campaigns from industry, of which I am aware, and I know the people, and that might be one thing that could be done. I work on a number of industry academia collaborations, and I'm aware of the sense once you get down to the people at the bench that the same concerns are there, that we are concerned that students are not coming and taking up studentships this year specifically because we rely on those. I say we, I don't really speak for industry, but I was quite upset when I realized that there are students not coming and training to work in science because of simply the referendum result and things even happened yet. So our suggestion to the campaign is to start to link yourself to the bodies that represent industry, even if you remain as the academic voice. And I think it's important to remain as the academic voice as well, because concerns are slightly different. But if you want to strengthen the message, then that's one way that you could do it. It's just a suggestion. I can speak to Jenny after. I'm also a statistician, so when everyone says speaking statistically, it tends to make me quite irate.
I'll try and avoid using that phrase. And I think that's right that we've, it was mentioned earlier that, trying to gain some kind of unified message across the science community, be that the learning societies, be that industry, be that all the universities, it would be great if we could unify behind something common. Let's see if we can herd those cats. So moving on to the next bit, smoothly, we're going to try and make science funding a political issue. And in order to do that, as I said, holding in the back of our minds has to be this plan to get hundreds of people in every single constituency writing to their MP or telling their MP or visiting their MP, telling them that science is vital. Now, this is actually kind of strategy agnostic. We could literally do a mass mail out. We could then, we can then ask MPs to do things. I think the most important thing when you write a letter or go and visit your MP is to give them a concrete thing they can do rather than just shake your fist. This could be sign an early day motion. This could be attend a particular debate. There are a whole range of options we can choose, but fundamentally we need those thousands of people in order to make whatever strategy we intend to adopt effective. So, the first thing we need to do, and this was actually mentioned earlier, is make it easier. I think we need to produce some resources that say if you want to write to your MP, if you want to go and visit them, then these are the points you need to raise, and this is just some help. We don't have to exactly phrase letters. I don't think MPs are fans of form letters, but telling people the facts in a way that they can digest and phrase their own way is very important. I also think we've never had the resources, and I'm really hoping that now we've got these more, sort of new blood, this fresh round of volunteers, that we can think about strategically targeting particular constituencies. Because I know that, you know, if you've only got a majority of a few hundred and then a few tens or hundreds of your constituents write to you and tell you that a particular issue is important, that's a place where you're particularly going to pay attention. And it's also true that there are certain constituencies that are more scientific hubs than other constituencies are because labs or universities are located in them. But then we also need to just expand our reach in a very general sense. We need to be able to hit more people. When we send out a mail shot or when we start a campaign, we need to just hit lots and lots more people at the same time. And the ways in which we're going to do that are firstly trying to keep some momentum. So one of the problems is that when we have a campaign, it's often a year or 2 years until the next big thing that we're doing. And so I'd like to invite some suggestions about what can we do between campaigns and what can we include in regular mail outs? You know, should we just be sending out a few things about great developments that have happened in science in the last 3 months and how funding has affected specific things, or any ideas like that, just to try and keep the momentum up a little bit between actual events. I think it's also really important that we get more specific local representatives, and I can only speak for the universities and institutes I've been involved with, but I know that their communication structures are labyrinthine and utterly different. So coming up with a huge mailing list of heads of department, which is one thing we tried to do for the last campaign, I'm not convinced that those will necessarily have been disseminated to the universities we sent them to. And what would be great is if we could have a representative in universities, in businesses, in all kinds of different organisations that are affected by science, who can send out emails, who can use Slack, who can pin it to the notice board, however it is they communicate in that organisation, and get people aware of the campaign that we're making. And finally, I think we need to be more proactive. And again, this is something that I'd love all of our volunteers to get on board with. We've traditionally been quite reactive as an organisation. If the government threatens, you know, the whole raison d'etre of Science is Vital as the government threatened to cut science, and scientists rose up in defiance of that. But what we've never been particularly good at, and partly it's been a sort of human power issue, we need to actually be keeping up with what's happening in the news and keeping up with what's happening in statistics. Those GDP graphs we should produce every single year. As soon as the stats are out, we should have the graph in the newspaper the next day. So again, just having a team of volunteers and some stats nerds who are able to give us a hand with that would be great. Another thing I'd like to do is create some subject-based case studies. So I've sort of had this thing with the cancer statistic, which is the one I always love to headline talks with. I'd love to know about your random obscure area of science, how it gets 5p per person per year of funding, but how the impact of that area could be 25p per person per year. It doesn't necessarily have to be huge, but as long as it demonstrates that the impact is significantly outsized compared to the investment, it's just another example, another angle from which we can make this attack. So I'd love to get scientists across disciplines involved. So those are just a few of my our ideas, and I'd like to sort of invite discussion around those and any other ways we can just engage vast numbers more people in how long? 7 minutes. 7 long minutes, so knock yourselves out.
Just in terms of writing to your MP, I wrote to my MP, and I guess one of the bits that was useful, having done it is and talked about it, is sharing what you get back. So some of what I got was effectively senior government minister, clearly hands are tied to government recess, etc. But now having discussed with other people, I'm going to go back again with slightly more direct and hopefully more useful discussion from that. And so actually having some forum where we could collate or share our experiences and start to see when it's party-based, when it's individuals, and when people are actually taking a personal interest, because I really believe that there are some MPs who are on our side pushing that forward.
I think in terms of putting together arguments, it's sometimes important to maybe keep in mind that there's a left-wing agenda and a right-wing agenda to making the argument. So I think that if you were lobbying Jeremy Corbyn, then you'd probably just say you want to increase spending on everything. Why don't you increase spending on science as well? Whereas if you were lobbying Nicola Blackwood, or then you might want to say, well, this skills that are generated by science funding are what's needed to attract inward investment from GSK or from companies or whatever. And so I think that you need to slightly pitch what your strategy is for targeting your MP, depending upon which side of the political spectrum they fall down on.
Hi, Miriam Grace. On the subject of keeping momentum going, I'm not sure if I'm on your mailing list at the moment, so disclaimer there. But if it's not something you're doing already, then maybe writing something like a monthly newsletter on development and politics. So I'm on several mailing lists from various learned societies, and they do a policy roundup, and it's really useful, and it also keeps it vivid in my mind. and it reminds me to check in with their events, so that might be helpful.
Okay. There you go.
Hey, yeah, Becky Hill. A couple of things. The on the local representatives, I don't. Yeah, disclaimer. Also, I'm not on the mailing list. Do you have sort of links with science communication groups, all of those sort of branches and things to do events like that and get them to sort of so make it formal and all of the like SciComm courses and all that sort of thing. You've got a built-in sort of promotional activity there. And on the MP sort of side, when you're engaging with them, I don't know if you do, but get people to say what the guy behind said, what the outcome was, but also to tweet about it, take a picture of the letter they get back, take a screenshot of the email at the MP in it, say, oh, thanks so much at blah, blah, blah. You did a great thing, because then the MP will retweet it. And they love being praised, don't they? And that'll just encourage other people to do it. So.
Actually, I just wanted to raise one more thing, is that I looked into this funding issue earlier in the year, and one of the government agencies that shows all the statistics and so on, one of the data that they always show is that, oh, well, maybe our percentage of GDP that we fund is low, but if you look at kind of value for money, we are actually really, really good. And so this is an argument that I've heard before as to why is it that we need to invest more when we are doing so well as it is. So I think we really need to kind of have an answer to that question as well.
My answer would be, we're doing great, let's fund it more. Because look at the effective value for money you get. But anyway, oh, hello.
So there's like an increasing number of science festivals and events that go on across the country, and I guess there's probably not much point going there and telling people there that science is important, because you're kind of preaching to converted to some extent, but maybe trying to identify what these events are and getting local MPs going along to ones in their areas as a way of engaging them with a kind of an enthusiastic group of people that already buy into the argument.
And I actually think there would be some merit if we could build up a network of people to go and visit science festivals and tell them these numbers, because I've never given a scienceogram talk and someone's gone, oh, I knew that already. You know, everybody I've spoken to, be they policymakers, be they scientists themselves, be they members of the public, have been shocked when you put it in those stark terms. And I'd love, again, to have a team of people who could go out and do this, because I think what we've really been, and the same with engaging with, you know, science communicators, we need someone to go through a list of science communication courses in the UK and make sure they have that email, which is just something that we haven't had the person power to achieve in the past. So please volunteer. Mike.
Social media, Facebook is very, very powerful, because especially if you can develop the nice little graphics like you've done already, that's very shareable stuff, and then it gets seen by lots of people. And so if you were to put more effort into sorry, that came out wrong. No, but if you were to take your Facebook page and say like have one post a day is kind of like the standard, and then, you know, we were to reshare some of yours and help you build up your audience, that is a good way to be seen by people as being, you know, live and always energetic and always present. And, you know, even when you don't have the content yourself, you always come across, you know, a great article in Science or Nature or whatever that can be about science policy, or that can be relative to it. You just share that. As long as it's visual and lively, then, especially with the broad message of science is vital, then it keeps the energy high. And that is then develops that online audience which you can tap into for events, you can tap into for social mobilization around issues, and so forth and so on. It's very effective to keep a Facebook group growing and going.
Stephen.
I don't know how practical this is, but based on the idea of creating subject-based case studies, so we had the Research Excellence Framework a year or so ago, and so out of that came 7,500 impact case studies from universities all over the UK. Now, there's probably some fantastic stories in there about the unexpected value of science to the UK in terms of policy areas, or, you know, innovations and new technologies, new techniques, new products. You know, it would be a job of work, but maybe if we have more volunteers, we can just start people going through those, at least to highlight interesting ones. Whether or not one would then have the capacity to dig into it and, you know, make a really strong case, I'm not sure. But but there's definitely a resource there that I think in principle should be very valuable as a campaigning tool.
I think I think I would like to speak more about the statistics. I'm a statistician myself, working on childhood obesity, and honestly, the amount of numbers thrown at us and our audience is amazing, and they just leave the room with nothing. So I think we have to make sure that statistics is understandable. And as you were saying about Facebook, you put a picture on Facebook, you get 100 likes, and you put a science-related statistics, nobody even bothers. So we have to make sure that the layman understands what we are talking about. That's very, very important now.
I actually slightly disagree with that, and not to blow my own trumpet because that's awful, but I've had well over 100,000 shares of a science statistics related infographic on Facebook. So it does happen. It can work.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I really think engaging with clubs and that. I mean, so if I think to the Village Astronomical Society where I come from, there's lots of people that they're pro science, but many of them, I don't think they would think it was their place to write to their MP to promote science funding because they're not scientists. And so if you can provide the information so that they kind of have a better sense of where they stand, they feel more confident, you're reaching out to them directly, that would be fantastic.
And I think I'm afraid we're going to wrap it up, so sorry, but I think that's a really good point in terms of just with the science communication courses, with the astronomy clubs. There are all these left field ideas which we've not necessarily had the time or capacity to even think of, let alone follow up. But there are so many groups who have patient groups are a really obvious one as well that we've never really reached out to. There are so many people that are involved in these networks. If we just had the capacity, the resources to go through it, make some lists, go through them, get in contact, maybe go and talk at a few of these places, that would be amazing, and that would massively grow our support base, I think. So it's very much, I mean, the thing is, a lot of this stuff is actually very hard work. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, but I think it could bear fruit. So that's the end of that discussion. Thank you very much for lots of productive comments. And now I think it's over to Shane, who's going to be sorting out the election of our executive committee. Shane.
I don't know whether you've all noticed, but there's a slight recurring theme throughout tonight, which Stephen brought up about effort and help and volunteers. And there are lots of brilliant ideas. There's a whole chunk that were in the minutes from our last AGM, which we wanted to implement, but we never managed to find the time, energy and resource to make it happen. So it's kind of that stage of the evening now where we're asking you not to dip into your pockets, but into your timesheets, because we really do need help to make this happen. And there's a number of ways we can make this happen. One of which is simply by being here, and thank you, giving ideas, giving your £3.14 as membership. Another way is to volunteer, and we did a call out a few weeks ago asking people, and we had 50 people who have volunteered to help out in various ways, and Kimberly's been taken up on her offer already as she's writing up the notes, and Nathan indeed, of this meeting. So that's really happening. But if any of you haven't signed up for that volunteer and you think you can give a bit of time or expertise, Andrew, I'm sure, will let you know how to do that because I can't remember. Be on the website somewhere. Now, the other thing about the AGM is, as I said before, we're a constituted organisation. We have to be democratic, so we take money off people and we're lobbying and all that sort of thing. So we need a decision-making body, and that decision-making body is the executive committee elections. We have 10 members of that committee, and we're supposed to re-elect us all every year. But this year's a bit of a special one because some of the people who have been around for a very long time have decided that it's time to step down because things like families are growing, and to join an advisory board, which we are setting up. And I'm looking here particularly at Jenny and Stephen here, who are stepping down and forming that advisory board, and they're going to nucleate it, did you say? And take that forward. Also, we have Tom Hartley and Paula Salgado, who are watching on the live stream. Hi, guys. Who are also stepping down, and Matt Martin and Nathan Skeen and Richard P. Grant. Who is he watching from, Kent? We hope so indeed, who are all stepping down. So that means we do have a lot of space for people to come up and help us make the decisions that we've talked about here tonight, and to help drive Science is Vital forward over the next year and years to come. So as I said, there are 10 positions, 5 of which carry a title to it. But first of all, I just want to thank you. I don't know whether it's going to be my place, but to thank Jenny, Stephen, and the rest of them for what's been an absolutely enormous amount of work and effort that's been going on over these last 6 years. It's been amazing, and I didn't prepare a speech to thank you, but thank you very, very much. Give us a clap. So, the first position on the list that we need to do, I ought to just say that, obviously being a very highly organised bunch, we put out all the nomination forms at least 2 weeks ago. You all filled them out. Now, the case is that according to our constitution, if they are unopposed, then we can elect them. If there is a competition for a space, then we will hold a proper election, do it online and things like that at a later date. But does anyone not want to nominate someone for the chair? The role of the chair is... Oh, Jenny, who would you nominate?
I'd like to nominate Andrew Steele for chair.
Anyone else want to be nominated for the chair? Is anyone online? Going once? Going twice? Going 3 times? In the lack of any opposition, I'll then suggest that Andrew Steele is now chair of Science is Vital for the next year. We have 2 vice chairs. Now, what's the role of the vice chair? The vice chair is what's been performed by Andrew and Stephen over the last few years. Is a second pair of hands, basically, someone who feels that they can help and get involved in the preparation of what we do, and the direction, possibly be prepared to speak to media if need be, and Andrew's incapacitated. Which he may be if he does the wrong thing. So it's a big ask for people, and we've got 2 spaces going, but if anyone would like to put themselves forward, either now or at a later date, then please do. But is there anyone in the room or on the live stream? Because what I failed to mention was that we discussed, and I'd like some agreement on that, I discussed that 4 of the 10 people on the exec, we would like to be not based in London. I think it's really important that people who are outside of London are represented in this discussion and in this campaign. And we have, currently 4 members already who are outside London, including myself. It is very possibly an active member. We do everything online. We have fun Google Hangouts, and we do most of our decision making and information sharing via Basecamp. So if there's anyone on the live stream who'd like to stick their hand up, Marianne, I hope, will let me know. But is there anyone in the room that would like to join the campaign as a vice chair? Okay, I'll leave that to the pub after you've had a couple of pints. We have the position of treasurer. Anyone like to nominate someone for treasurer? Oh, Andrew, who?
Thanks to your wonderful entertaining speeches, Shane, I'd love to nominate you.
Thank you, I'll accept that nomination. We'll use applause then instead of voting. I think that's grand. The next named position is secretary. You did volunteer for it. I would like to nominate Kimberly, although we haven't discussed it yet whether you would agree. But you would be. So I'd nominate Kimberly. Anyone else want to be secretary? Because it really is exciting, even more so than treasurer. No, brilliant. Can we have a round of applause for Kimberly? Now we have 5 ordinary members, so it's basically people who are members of the exec who don't want to have the big nameplate on their door saying vice chair or something. Again, it's just people who are willing to give a bit of time, thought and energy towards the campaign to make it happen. Is there anyone in the room who would like to be an ordinary member? Ah, Marianne at the back. So we'll have a round of applause for Marianne. We have 4 more, of which I think 2 at least will need to be outside of London, so live stream, please get... did we say how we want them to get in touch? No? I'd say it's compatible with popping out a baby anyway. So we'll take Joanna, if everyone would like to applaud Joanna. Now, come on, let's not be awkward about this. Is there anyone else in the room? Excellent. Ben and Lawrence. So that takes us up to 1, 2, 3, 4 members. We've got one more space for members. If we could have a round of applause for Lawrence and Ben. Do you know, it's as much as you can give. You know, if you can give an hour more than the person who hasn't stuck their hand up, then that's great. You know, there's no obligation to come travelling to London for things. I mean, I tend to. I live in Bath. I do because I'm often up here meeting people. But Tom and Paula, I've not seen him in ages. Has anyone ever met Matt? So it is absolutely very possible to do it without an enormous amount of time. We really need someone in the north. Round of applause, please, for Austin, isn't it? Oh, 2 more nominations. Okay. Well, in the lack of a vice chair, then we've still got the spaces on the exec, so even if you don't take up the role. So, this is getting interesting. Okay. Yeah, now we have to handle it. So what we'll do is we'll take all these nominations, Bethlehem and Shikta, and with all of them, and then we'll email you afterwards and email all the people who are members, which are the people in this room, and we'll start getting hold of the live stream people if they want to do that, and we'll organise a proper election. But one of the things we could do, if necessary, is have a slightly expanded associate members of the exec to allow everyone to be involved and give the time that they want to. That'd be really, really helpful. Yes?
So I've got a nomination, which is a guy called Joe Sarling, who unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, but he's a campaigner on housing issues. So he's got quite a lot of experience lobbying the government on that topic, and he'd like to lend some of his expertise to Science is Vital on this topic. So that's a nomination in absentia.
Brilliant. So that concludes the elections. We, I think, well, no, it starts the elections, concludes the nominations, unless some more come in off the live stream. But I'll hand back to Andrew as chair.
So the question is, any other business? I think the answer is no. Pub, that's a very important piece of any other business. And I'd just like to, and I'm going to read off a list so I don't forget anyone, because that'd be really embarrassing. Thank you so much, Jenny. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you so much to Richard, Paula, Tom, Nathan, and Matt, who aren't with us tonight, but have been long-serving members of the exec as well. I look forward to working with everybody. Thank you for coming. So the pub is, which way are we facing?